Welcome back to the Talking Ketamine podcast. This is episode 56, Ketamine's Child.
Great to be here. Today we are looking at a 2026 study by Otto and colleagues. We are exploring oral ketamine and asking a surprising question. What if the subjective high you feel from a pill isn't actually from the ketamine itself?
Right, so to really set the mission for today, we are exploring a totally fascinating 2026 pharmacokinetics study. We want to understand exactly how the body processes oral ketamine specifically for treatment-resistant depression, or TRD.
Yeah, and how this study completely alters the way we need to think about dosing for that therapeutic experience.
Exactly. So whether you are a clinician, maybe a patient, or just, insanely curious about how the body processes medicine, this is going to fundamentally change how you view the pills you swallow.
It really shifts your entire perspective. Because, well, we have to start with why researchers are even looking at oral ketamine in the first place, right?
Right. I mean, currently intravenous and intranasal ketamine are kind of the standard for TRD, but they require specialized clinical facilities.
Yeah, exactly. You have to monitor side effects like hypertension and, well, dissociation. So an oral pill is just highly appealing.
It's cheaper, it's scalable, and it massively reduces the burden on the patient.
But it hits a biological roadblock, the first pass effect.
Oh, right. Because unlike an IV drip that goes straight into your blood, swallowing a pill means it has to pass through the gut and the liver first. Which actually brings me to my toll booth analogy.
Oh, I love this analogy. Go for it.
Okay, so think of the liver as this incredibly strict toll booth on a highway. When oral ketamine passes through, the liver takes this massive toll.
It really does. It's an aggressive toll.
Yeah, it transforms most of the parent drug into a metabolite called S-norketamine before it ever reaches the wider bloodstream.
Right. It metabolizes the drug extensively. It uses specific enzymes, primarily CYP2B6 and CYP3A4, to do this.
So it's literally taking the original drug and chopping it up.
Exactly. And the result is that when you take ketamine orally, you end up with very low levels of actual ketamine in your system.
Wait, so hardly any of the original drug survives?
Almost none, but you get incredibly high levels of its child, basically, the S-norketamine.
Wow. So because the liver alters the chemical profile so drastically, does this change the actual therapeutic experience for the patient?
Well, to figure that out, we have to look at the visual analog scale, or the VAS, specifically the metric for feeling high.
The psychotomimetic effects, things like dissociation and altered perception.
Yeah, and many experts believe that experiencing these subjective effects is absolutely essential for the drug to deliver its antidepressant benefits for TRD.
Right, the psychological journey is tied to the neurological reset.
Exactly. So here is the massive aha moment from the study. They used pharmacokinetic-Pharmacodynamic modeling, or PKPD modeling.
Okay, PKPD modeling. What did it actually show?
It showed that after an IV drip, the original ketamine drives the high. But after taking an oral pill, it is almost solely the metabolite, the S-norketamine, that is responsible for the subjective effects.
Wait, hold on. So we've been giving all the credit to ketamine for the psychological experience of the pill.
Yeah, we have.
When in reality, the parent drug is barely doing anything, and the child metabolite is driving the entire trip.
That is exactly what the data confirms. It's wild, right?
That is mind-blowing. How is the metabolite doing that?
Well, S-norketamine still interacts with the brain's NMDA receptors. It just has a lower affinity than ketamine, meaning it doesn't bind as perfectly.
Oh, so it's like a clunky key in a lock.
Perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
But because there is such a massive volume of it from that liver toll booth, it just completely overwhelms the receptors.
So it proves that the metabolite is a pharmacologically active powerhouse all on its own.
Precisely. But now that we know what causes the high, we have to look at the data to see if patients are actually getting enough of it.
Right. Because if it's a clunky key, you need a lot of them.
Right.
What did the researchers compare?
They compared healthy participants receiving a standard IV dose, which was 0.4 milligrams per kilogram over 40 minutes.
Okay, so that's the baseline. And they compared that to oral doses.
Yeah, against two oral doses. A 0.2 milligram per kilogram dose and a slightly higher 0.45 milligram per kilogram dose.
Let me guess, the oral doses fell short.
They did. The studied oral doses did not create the necessary subjective effects to match the IV experience.
That is a major problem for treating TRD.
Huge problem. But there was a completely fascinating data quirk in this study.
Oh, the anticipatory effect. I saw this in the paper.
The placebo effect, essentially.
What?
Participants reported feeling a high on the VAS scale almost immediately after swallowing the pill.
Which is physically impossible, right? I mean, long before the drug or the metabolite could have possibly hit their bloodstream.
Exactly. It just shows how powerful the brain's anticipation is.
But wait, if people are reporting a high before the toll booth has even processed the drug, how do we know what's chemical and what's just the power of expectation?
That's a great question. And it's exactly why that PKPD modeling is so crucial.
Because it filters out the placebo effect.
Yes. The mathematical models filter the psychological noise out to show the actual chemical peak.
And the actual peak from the metabolite was still too low at the 0.45 milligram per kilogram dose.
Right. So since the standard oral doses are failing to replicate the necessary ID experience, how do we fix the problem?
I mean, we have to use this new mathematical model, right?
Yeah, the study used its PKPD model to run simulations.
Just to figure out how to successfully increase the subjective effects.
Exactly. To match the proven antidepressant experience of an IV drip, the model shows patients need a significantly higher oral dose.
How much higher are we talking?
The target oral dose identified by the simulation is approximately 1.0 milligrams per kilogram.
Wow. That is a huge jump.
It is vital information, though, especially for designing future clinical trials for TRD.
Right, to ensure researchers don't underdose patients and mistakenly think oral ketamine just doesn't work.
Exactly. It's like you can't just use the same math if you change the variables.
Yeah, it's like a recipe analogy. If you swap out a core baking ingredient, you can't just use the same measurements and expect the same cake.
That is a really great way to think about it.
We have to completely adjust the math and dose specifically for the metabolite, not the parent drug.
I agree completely. And because higher oral doses might absorb more slowly, clinics will need entirely new safety monitoring strategies compared to lower doses.
Because it's a totally different absorption curve.
Yeah, it sits in the gut longer, the peak is delayed, and you can't just shut it off quickly like an IV.
Such a good point. You know, before we sign off, I want to leave you with a mind-bending concept to mull over.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Well, if the body transforms this medicine so profoundly that the child does the heavy lifting, what about other psychiatric medications you might take?
That is a really unsettling thought.
Right. Are you actually experiencing the drug written on the prescription bottle? Or are you experiencing a hidden secondary chemical your own liver manufactured?
It really makes you question everything in your medicine cabinet.
So when we take a pill, the liver transforms the medicine, and that transformed version is what actually shifts our perspective.
Exactly. It shows that increasing those crucial subjective effects with oral dosing means we have to dose for the metabolite, not just the parent drug.
A totally new way to look at the process. Thanks for listening to the Talking Ketamine podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.